New Vegas has no shortage of baddies, from little critters to big critters to drug-addled raiders trying to show you the sight of your own blood.
Do you like the sight of your own blood?
Hog killing time!
The post-apocalyptic Mojave Wasteland is a keg powder of tension, driven by the barbarism of survivalism. It brings out the worst in us. One of these baddies has gone down as one of the most iconic enemies in all of the Fallout games, none other than the Cazador.
No, don't like that.
Josh Sawyer himself has stated, these flying menaces were one of his personal favorite contributions to the game. Proud of his demonic concoction of birthing these six-legged freaks into existence. In this video, I'm going to be going over why I personally agree with this sentiment. 100%, I think Cazadors are great. What they are, what makes them great, and just generally, they are one of the best aspects of Fallout New Vegas.
Ring a ding, baby.
Diving right into it, what are they? Well, Cazadors from an enemy design standpoint are very simplistic. I mean, just take a real world tarantula hawk wasp, give it some tren, let it hit the weights and boom, you got Cazadors, and then wait for the Greg Doucette natty or not video. The real life tarantula hawk wasp don't really need an introduction. They have been catapulted into pop culture from creators such as Coyote Peterson, who got stung by one, and more pars, just to name a few. This injection into the more broad pop culture side of the animal-oriented content creation side of the internet is pretty much entirely due to their horrific hunting strategy of using tarantulas as basically, well, how more pars put it, converting them into a KFC family bucket. They use tarantulas to reproduce in a really terrifying way. The hunting strategy of one of the largest paper wasps in the entire world is they swoop down like a hawk, paralyzing it with a crippling sting, drag them off to their death lair, then plant a larva onto the K-hold spider's abdomen. Then the larva literally burrows into the still alive, fully conscious spider, eating them from the inside out like some sort of fictional sci-fi horror monster. This method of reproduction is insinuated to be how they possibly reproduce in New Vegas, although this is more on the back burner, and to my knowledge it's never fully explained, but I could be wrong about that. But perhaps they switched up their reproduction / diet strategy for something like, I don't know, mutated ants or rad scorpions. It's totally plausible. Originally created in the Big MT by Dr. Boreas, intended to be a harmless super predator, but obviously things got out of hand, both in the intended design and the simple fact of containing them in the first place, as they are found all throughout the Mojave and Zion Canyon. Boreas also thinks they are quote-unquote sterile, like they can't reproduce, but this is obviously false, as you see nests, eggs, and healthy populations all throughout the lands contradicting this. Cazador is also Spanish for hunter, which I always thought was really fun, as Sawyer thought the native population would originally name these creatures in Spanish. Just some cool world building. They're big-ass, venomous wasps that move erratically, hit pretty damn hard, even taking their venom out of the equation, and really do go against the grain of most mutated insects across the series. Joshua Sawyer has also stated them being on the top of the totem pole was intentional by design. It was no mistake, as he rightly felt that most bug enemies throughout the series have lacked in the real threat department, often being cannon fodder tier enemies on average. Lore is not my strong suit. I do love lore, but this video is not a lore dive. The whole purpose of this video leans more into the enemy design aspect of these creatures, through the obstacles they present as enemies and the gameplay required in dispatching them, which are some of the best highlights of why they are one of the best designed enemies throughout the entire franchise. Let's get into what really makes them great. Cazadors are GOATED for primarily 3 reasons: their encounter layout, their enemy design, and their evolution throughout the game as you level up. Starting with the encounter layout is basically where enemies are located strategically, kind of where they are literally. As the game progresses, highlighting the element of using enemies themselves as both a introductory to the lighter side of the game and the more brutal side of the game. Think like easy early game, kind of like tutorial enemies or bosses versus a ramp up in difficulty. Enemies are often utilized to kind of show the player what to expect. Depending on the game itself, this can be anything from using enemies for the flow of combat, introducing more mechanics, or just simple, easy kind of like introductory level enemies to just kind of dip your toes in the world of what the combat really has to offer. In a more linear structured game, tougher enemies can be thrown at the player through an encounter that is meant to be obviously difficult. Off the top of my head, think of a game like Resident Evil 4 with the regenerators, for example, even though there's tons of other examples in that game, or the Last of Us games with stuff like clickers and bloaters are just a few examples. There's of course countless examples throughout games. I mean, there's tons of games, so. However, in open world games like Fallout New Vegas, enemies can be used for this as well, without a doubt. I mean, they are. But the open world sandbox nature of go wherever you want obviously changes this dynamic up quite a bit compared to a more linear game. I'm not a purist versus linear versus open world sandboxes, as both have pros and cons and both can be amazing games. But the dynamics that both of these structures provide does inherently change how and what you can do effectively. Cazadors in New Vegas serve the encounter layout through their placement on the map, and the difficulty spike they provide the courier straight out of Doc Mitchell's and beyond. Cazadors are intriguing because they are basically deathclaws in the sense of them just being badass apex predators. They're the cream of the crop. They just are downright efficient killing machines of the Mojave. These flying menaces are strategically placed in conjunction with deathclaws and to a lesser extent rad scorpions in Scorpion Valley, but they're utilized just north of Good Springs right in the early game, acting as an environmental hurdle for the courier to really limit the player so you can't just do a quick easy breeze of reaching the strip right out of the gate. The game naturally utilizes the open world with enemies to organically facilitate the infamous loop route that New Vegas is known for. The intended route. Although many enemies are used as hurdles for the courier throughout the world, some being more vital than others, Cazadors and deathclaws, in my opinion, really do highlight the ingenuity of this game design the best. All of this exemplifies how well thought out the world really is, and it also rewards player knowledge for replay value. It gives veterans options that, say, like newbies or the unaware player might not even be privy to. You don't have to go the loop route. You can go through Black Mountain, you can get the NCR armor in Nipton and then take the tram going the typical loop route. You could even straight up just get a good gun and go straight through the Cazadors, and then just make your way past Cook's base and go straight to the strip. There's many ways to get to the strip.
I'm Cook, bitch.
But there's also many hurdles from this direction. And that's kind of the whole purpose that Cazadors are used in the early game, which is brilliant. Cazadors are also commonly found in packs off the beaten path, usually in mountainous regions, and this kind of just creates this dread and fear of running into them when you're not as capable of a courier. It's a constant reminder of the risk versus reward when weighing your options of exploring versus staying on the more well-traveled, safer routes, which just leads to the enemy design of these flying menaces, as they're pretty much one for one with their real-life counterparts from a design standpoint, so there's not much to go over in the how they look department. They look awesome though. Cazadors in game are pack hunters, contrasted with the real-world wasp being a solitary hunter by nature, which is abnormal for most paper wasp species. Cazadors pack hunting likely formed as an adaptation to the dangerous Wasteland, similar kind of to how lions evolved by forming prides in Africa, increasing the success of hunting and overcoming the vast dangers of the African bush. There's strength and safety in numbers. This pack hunting could also be perhaps their upbringing when in the labs back at Big MT. This, of course, is highly speculative, but I think it's pretty reasonable that this is what could be the case and could have even been thought of by the game designers. Communal or even tight close quarter living could really have pushed this species to more or less work with one another in getting through bad living conditions, causing a sort of switch in their evolutionary development from solitary hunters, more aligned with the real-world tarantula hawk, to communal hive packs that are more atypical in most paper wasp species. This evolutionary switch-up is seen in various animal species, primarily adapting to urbanization, forcing animals to coexist alongside humans. But some examples of this in the RL that can showcase this possibility is something seen in domestic house cats. Feral cats often form prides. I don't know if they're actually called prides, but they form groups of other feral cats, you know, reinforcing the safety in numbers aspect. And this has also been seen in fruit flies that have adapted and even thrived socially in large numbers in something like lab conditions. Despite being solitary in nature, animals learn to adapt when they have to. And anthropogenic changes are very common when animals are compelled to be versatile and change up their social structures for the benefit of survival, which really is a grounded, kind of realistic approach considering the possibilities of these Cazadors adapting to their environment. Which kind of just leads into the gameplay slash combat side of why Cazadors are so amazing. And from a gameplay standpoint, they do subvert the typical association of most bug enemies in the Fallout games. As I already stated, mutated insects are usually, you know, cannon fodder enemies like rad roaches and bloatflies. There are exceptions for sure, even in New Vegas, like rad scorpions and mantises, but Cazadors really do kind of surface to the top, you know, they fill the ecological niche of apex predators in the Mojave, alongside things like deathclaws and even night stalkers. It is really refreshing to see a mutated insect be so badass. Their Achilles heel, or I guess their Achilles wing, really does highlight and takes into account the limb damage mechanic in Fallout to great effect. And to be fair, a lot of enemies, you know, can be exploited like this, like crippling Deathclaw's legs are like also, it's also really good. But it's done extremely well with the Cazadors, as it's literally their kryptonite. Crippling their wings kind of highlights the vulnerabilities of these baddies, you know, it makes things like shotguns, submachine guns, and even some pistols and many other guns, even guns with like high spread that can be hip fired very well. Anything that is like automatic or semi-auto and, you know, has a decent amount of rounds in the chamber is good to go against these creepy crawlies. They're very fast, like you're not faster than a Cazador, like they are just like way faster than you. You combine that with as their strength with their weakness of crippling their wings, it makes a very compelling gameplay loop when fighting against them. Killing a pack of like, I don't know, say 4 or 5 Cazadors coming in hot and heavy, it's a badass feeling, you know? It really does feel badass when you come out on top, especially if you don't use VATS as a crutch. It's a very pleasing experience in Fallout New Vegas. It's very memorable. It makes you feel just like, hell yeah, I'm a badass, highlighting how well of an enemy design this really is. They're also the best selling point for the perk entomologists, as they are easily the most dangerous bug in New Vegas, and probably the most threatening bug across the entire series, although I haven't played all of the Fallout games, so I can't speak in certainties. Cazadors are also extremely venomous. They're kind of infamous for, yeah, you can kill them, but then you'll die after. Kind of like getting dotted up by a tier 3 affliction warlock in classic World of Warcraft. If you get it, you get it. This of course doesn't really matter if you have some anti-venom on hand or the perk Heartless from Old World Blues. New Vegas kind of leans into the design of enemies do massive damage to you and you do massive damage to them, if that makes sense. It's mano y mano. You're a glass cannon and so are most enemies generally. Of course, you can go against this. You can be like a tank build with heavy armor, or even crazy builds like passive regen builds with Radchild and stuff, but the point is, that's the general philosophy behind the enemy design, which I think is a really interesting design. It really does scale a lot better overall than, in my opinion, Fallout 3, where, you know, anything that's difficult, just make it a health sponge kind of enemy, which I don't really like. Cazadors generally do have decent health, like they don't have too much health, health, they have a decent amount of health and they could take some beatings, but they really do lack in any department of defense. They're prone to all types of ballistic weapons due to them not having any DT or damage resistance at all. This leaves them extremely vulnerable, even more so to ammo types like hollow points, as this net negative against armor actually pushes their armor even lower. In any other form of damage that pierces through armor like melee with piercing strikes hits even harder. Melee is actually really good against Cazadors, surprisingly with things like Super Slam. I mean, everyone knows how overpowered Super Slam is, but the hunting strategy that these beastly bugs impose on the courier is definitely leopard kung fu for sure. They fly in extremely fast, lashing out in overwhelming numbers due to their pack hunting, and just come with a swift ferocity in successive stings, injecting a venom that further inflicts a dot. This venom can be either somewhat countered with overtime healing effects like stim packs. I play on hardcore, so it's overtime healing in hardcore, or just outright cured with primarily anti-venom, but also snake tourniquets do this and deter anti-venom. The best thing about Cazadors though, in my opinion, is the evolution of them as you level up playing the game. In true RPG-esque fashion, Cazador's power creep scaling is pretty remarkable from an enemy design standpoint. Cazadors function on the same danger level scale, so to speak, of like deathclaws from the early to mid game. I mean, it's kind of indistinguishable in a way, outside of the workarounds with Cazadors like wing clipping them, but you kind of get the point. They're dangerous. They're just as much of a threat as a deathclaw. They really do, however, start to fade away a bit by comparison to something like a deathclaw. Somewhere around the late 20s, depending on your weapon loadout and your character build. Weapon loadout matters a lot in New Vegas. You can do a lot with a solid weapon, even when you're low level. It's kind of similar to the Souls games in that way. If you've ever done like a Soul level 1 or a Rune level 1, where you stay at level 1 and you try to beat the game, your character is like a lot stronger than you'd think otherwise by just reinforcing your weapon, increasing its damage, therefore increasing your offense. You're also still extremely fragile. You're a glass cannon because you can't level up, making you very prone to one-shots, especially late game and especially in Elden Ring. Anyone who's ever done a Rune level 1 Elden Ring playthrough knows what I'm talking about. But the damage you do is there. It's also often in the Souls games augmented further by ring or trinket slots, respectively. This kind of same effect is kind of how Cazadors are designed in New Vegas. And what I mean by that is, as you level up, your courier passively gains more health by default, alongside the perks increasing your overall power creep. And this very slow power creep starts to really add up against these insects, in contrast to something like deathclaws, who kind of just stay like freaking outright dangerous, like regardless of your level, especially in the Divide. I mean, they really do just hit hard regardless of your health or even DT. Cazadors, by contrast, scale to a more manageable enemy type in your later levels that really puts a magnifying glass on how they were tuned, kind of showing the foresight into the intentional design behind these enemies, turning them into something more akin to medium level monstrosities. You really do start to kind of overcome them. Cazadors are intentionally designed from the standpoint of being primarily, they're probably I'd say they're like the second most dangerous critter in the Mojave behind deathclaws. They are designed to be low to mid-level reapers, like they're just devils. And they act as environmental hurdles to prevent you from going to some places early in the game. And even later, there's still threats. I mean, they always are threats. You always have to be on your P's and Q's with Cazadors. They're an enemy you can really feel your courier come out on top against as you progress through the game. This is also further demonstrated alongside perks you can obtain in Old World Blues that increase your offense and defense against them. You know, perks like DNA Avenger, that just piles onto significantly reducing the danger posed by these creatures. Really does showcase how well thought out Cazadors really are in the bigger picture. And it's why, in my opinion, they are goated enemies in Fallout New Vegas. With all that said, consider subbing and all that good YouTube mumbo jumbo. I really do appreciate it. what is your take on Cazadors? Are they a love to hate enemy for you like they are for me? I really do love Cazadors and how well they are utilized. I guess that's pretty much evidenced by this video. Let me know down in the comments. I really love hearing from the Fallout community and just getting general interaction on my channel from all of you out there. It lights up my day beyond belief. But with all that said, Fallout fans, I really hope to see you in the next one.